Hey everyone, welcome back. For this deep dive, you've given us some seriously thought-provoking sources. And I gotta say, the whole idea of civil wars, it's heavy stuff.
It really is.
We're talking about societies tearing themselves apart from the inside, right? And you mentioned how these conflicts seem to crop up again and again throughout history.
Yeah, that cyclical nature of conflict is something that's fascinated historians and political scientists for centuries.
So let's dive into that. When we talk about a civil war, what are we really talking about? What defines this kind of conflict?
At its core, a civil war is an armed conflict that takes place within a single country, where different groups are fighting for control of the government or specific regions. And the consequences, well, they're always devastating.
It's about more than just battles and treaties, isn't it? It's the human cost, the shattered lives, the lasting trauma. And that's where I think art and music can be so powerful, in terms of expressing these really complex emotions. Like take Guns N' Roses' Civil War, for example. There's this raw, visceral energy to it, a real sense of anguish and frustration with the futility of it all.
Right, and you can hear that in the lyrics. Look at your young men fighting. Look at your women crying. It's that universal experience of loss and grief that comes with any war, but especially one where you're fighting your own people.
And then there's that line that really stuck with me. It feeds the rich while it buries the poor. It makes you think about the socioeconomic factors at play, how inequality and exploitation can fuel these conflicts.
Absolutely, that's a theme that echoes throughout history. When you have vast disparities in wealth and power, it creates this breeding ground for resentment and unrest. Think about the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, even the American Civil War, all rooted in these deep-seated economic and social divisions.
It's a sobering thought, for sure. And speaking of systems that benefit from war, the song also mentions the military-industrial complex, which always seemed like this kind of shadowy, ominous phrase.
Yeah, it's this idea that there's this self-perpetuating cycle where governments, the military, and arms manufacturers are all kind of intertwined, and it can be hard to disentangle their interests, especially when profits are tied to conflict.
Which makes you wonder, who's really benefiting from these wars?
Yeah.
It's certainly not the people on the ground, right? And I think that's what Axl Rose is getting at when he screams, I don't need your civil war. It's this visceral rejection of the whole system.
Yeah, and music has always been a powerful tool for protest, for giving voice to dissent and challenging the status quo. Think about the Vietnam War era, all those protest songs that became anthems for a generation. Civil War taps into that same energy, that desire to break free from these cycles of violence.
And the lyrics, look at the hate we're breeding, look at the fear we're feeding. It's scary how relevant that feels even today, right? Like we're still grappling with these forces of division and manipulation.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important to understand the historical context, to learn from the past, so we don't repeat those same mistakes. We need to be critical thinkers, question the narratives we're being fed, and be wary of anyone who benefits from sowing division.
Because in the end, no one wins in a civil war. Everyone loses.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for lending your expertise to this deep dive. It's been a pretty intense but important conversation. As we wrap up, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I would just ask everyone listening to consider this. How can we use our understanding of the past, of the factors that have driven civil wars throughout history, to create a more peaceful future? What can we do as individuals and as a global community to break these cycles of violence?
That's something for us all to think about.